So we can see that the body is um, an instrument that's able to detect these sensations um, and pass them along for our recognition of them. So there's the sensation, and then there is the recognition in our awareness of that sensation occurring. So even though ultimately it's all one phenomena, um, we can just distinguish between the sensation, the body picking up the movement of the body, or the sense of touch, or the sense of hearing, and the noticing of that. So the noticing we can see is just present. You don't have to try to define the awareness conceptually. We can just notice that there is something present already in all of us that is noticing whatever the sensory inputs are at the moment. So if we're not trying to control the sensory inputs or analyze them or categorize them, it makes it far easier to step back and notice that there is this awareness that is available and present to um, receive whatever sensory perceptions arise. So the awareness itself is without form, but the sensory perceptions arise within form. Thoughts also, right? Thoughts feel a little closer to home, and yet they have the same characteristic that we can observe them. And we can observe them in exactly the same way. We can allow them to be exactly as they are, however that is. So it's much more important to notice just the nature of thought, just the fact of thought. The thought is occurring, and there is something that witnesses that thought, notices the thought, whatever the thought is. So it's actually not necessary to think the right thoughts or to think no thoughts. We can just allow that function of mind to be as it is. And when we allow it to be as it is, we're better able to see just the mechanism of it, see that it is arising, thoughts arise, and have a certain lifespan and replaced with the next thought and the next thought in a totally linear fashion. So thoughts are just this sequence of words in our head that we learned how to do at a young age, and now we can't unlearn that. It goes on without our desiring it to be that way. So what we can do is allow that to be without judgment, without trying to manipulate it, because any attempt at manipulating our thought process is coming from another thought that says it's somehow desirable to do that, desirable for spiritual purposes, peace of mind. But that interference, that adding a new voice into an already crowded field, isn't going to result in less thought. So we can just see the nature of that, see how that all works without trying to correct or change or improve any particular thought. We can just allow that all to be. The same is true with feelings. We can see that all of these sensations, bodily feelings, sensory feelings, thoughts, emotional feelings, memories, all are appearances within awareness. And that awareness um, is already present, already fully functional. We don't have to improve it in any way. We just actually have to recognize it. That's what we can do. Recognize it, appreciate it, spend some time there. And notice that the awareness is an unmoving presence, and noticing all of the arisings within that awareness ever changing, thoughts changing, feelings changing, memories, ideas, feelings, sensations, everything constantly in flux, except what is noticing all of it. So we can better notice what is noticing if we're not engaged in trying to manipulate the content. So that's the real purpose of allowing everything to be as it is. Well, for one thing, it is as it is. So we can argue with that to our own suffering, or we can let it be and notice that whatever that content is, whatever's arising, good, bad, or indifferent, there's something that is present and non-judgmental for all of it. And we can choose to rest in that, even in the presence of thought, even in the presence of a busy mind. It doesn't have to be one to the exclusion of the other. Sometimes the awareness is more in the forefront, sometimes more in the background. It's not really, doesn't serve any purpose to insist that the awareness always present itself like spacious in the foreground, open. Doesn't need to always look like that. It's not going anywhere. It's present even when our mind is caught in thought, even when our mind is busy worrying about an unresolved interpersonal problem. We are still present for that. Our attention may be on the problem, but the awareness of our thought process, it's still there. Otherwise, we would have no way of knowing what that was happening at all. The awareness is required for that knowing, not knowing like knowing facts and history, but just a knowingness, right? The capacity to know, capacity to take it all in and not hold on to any of it, right? Not grasp anything, not push anything away, not try to retain anything, just being there for the next moment and the next moment. So that always available always present awareness can be recognized by us in whatever moment we choose to slow down long enough to notice its ever present quality. So, what I thought we could talk about tonight is the myth of personal happiness. Okay, it sounds like sort of a downer title, but probably the more appropriate title would be the myth of sustainable personal happiness, right? It's not like we're never happy, but the happiness isn't always present. Right? And I think the whole desire for happiness comes out of a very basic, fundamental, inherent sense of wishing ourselves well, right? Who wouldn't wish ourselves well? You know, so we have this sense of how that feels when wellness comes my way is I feel happy, right? And when things don't quite go my way, then I'm not as happy, or maybe I'm not happy at all, right? So we tend to view happiness as transactional. And, you know, it's based on conditions. You know, if the conditions arrange themselves in such a way that it feels beneficial, pleasant to me, then I'm happy. It makes sense. And if not, then I'm, I'm less than happy, right? So this is obvious, um, and you know, so out of this sort of fundamental, I would say, real sense of wishing ourselves well, there's a distortion that happens, and we interpret that longing um, in a way that we seek something, right? So what we seek is something. Well, the only reason we'd seek anything is if we didn't feel like it was present here now, and therefore it might be there some other time, some other place, some other conditions. And when we feel like that's the source of our happiness, when the conditions are right, you know, when all the stars line up and everything falls into place, then my happiness scale goes up. So we find ourselves spending a great deal of effort over the course of our lifetime to arrange or try to control or um, manipulate uh, circumstances, the outside environment that we happen to find ourselves in a way that produces conditions that make me feel more comfortable, more happier, right? You know, by the certain set of conditions yields pleasure by, I don't know, recognition, some personal gain, some intimacy, maybe wealth, maybe respect, different ways that we seek in the outside world to bring um, this sense of well-being, happiness, you know, into this field, right? This all makes sense. I mean, isn't this what we spend a great deal of time and energy doing? So there's some problems with that strategy, though. One is that it requires a great deal of effort, right? I mean, I remember spending um, probably, I don't know, at least 10, if not 15 years of my life trying to arrange my circumstances, you know, my job, where I lived, relationship, my garden, my friends, my schedule, everything in such a way that it sort of um, maximized my sense of comfort and ease and pleasantness in the world. But it took an enormous amount of effort. Um, The other thing that doesn't work out so well is that it's uncertain that your efforts will pay off, right? I mean, you can spend a lot of effort to, um, I don't know, be in relationship with a certain person or gain a certain level of community respect or professional respect. And sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it works out for a while, and sometimes a pin can pop the balloon, and so life can feel uncertain that way. So here we are spending a lot of effort to gain something that we feel isn't present here, hoping that we can find it out in the outside world somehow. And it's not certain. The other difficulty is other people have their own desires as well, and they may be competing desires, right? Maybe competing for the same job or the same level of acknowledgement or professional respect as you. And so, um, their success might be, um, have an impact on you. So there's that function. And there's a lot of people out there, and you never know what they're going to do. So that seems a little tenuous as well. The other difficulty is that when we finally do achieve whatever our goal for our imagined happiness is, when we do actually uh, achieve that, we find out fairly quickly that it doesn't last. Right? I mean, if we're talking about a bowl of ice cream, right, it might last, I don't know, 5 minutes, maybe 10 on a good night. But if we're talking about, some, you know, professional success that we've worked years and years for, and we finally attain that level of success, it can feel really, really good, right? I mean, there's no denying that. Um, and it can feel really, really good for a while, maybe months. But it's at some point, the novelty of that begins to wear off. As grand a success as something may have been, it's like, yeah, that was really, really nice. I mean, I feel really good about it. Feel good about myself having done that, and it has the quality of never being quite enough. If it was enough, right? If some experience was ultimately satisfying, I mean, like really ultimately satisfying, if we had just one such experience like that in our life, um, we'd be done, right? For the rest of our life, we'd be just basking in the glow of that, right? If it was ultimately satisfying, is that what happens? It's not. Um, Either there's a sense of it's, it was really nice, really rewarding, and after the novelty of it wears off, after I get used to that um, in my rear view mirror, um, we find that there's still a wanting for the next experience, the next pleasure, right? So we can see that this actually isn't all that much different than drug addict, huh? Always looking for the next fix, the next thing to make me feel okay. And I would say at least one of the fundamental driving forces of addiction of at any kind is the denial of um, that sense of satisfaction here in this moment, that it's not here and it's got to be somewhere else in the next substance, in the next experience, the next idea, the next spiritual practice. It can be anything, but that movement of it's not here and I've got to seek it outside of myself somehow. So just to sum up real quickly where we've gotten to so far, this pursuit of happiness takes a lot of effort. It's based on an assumption that um, it's not here now. It's got to be out there somewhere, probably sometime in the future. Um, we find out that even if it's, uh, well, it's sort of a precarious journey because it's uncertain and we might not always get what we want. But even if we do get what we want, there is this question of unsustainable. It tends to fade. Whatever pleasure is realized, um, that pleasure tends to lose its effect over time. And even if we attain our goal for our imagined pleasure, it doesn't quite have that ultimately satisfying characteristic to it. Right. So we basically then repeat the process, seek harder, right? Or we may not seek harder. We may just decide, well, it's not worth it. I'll just stay at home and, try to pretend I don't really want something. But, when we sense into that, that's not really a transcendent position. It's really a sort of a resignation of what we what we experience, but without really learning the lesson, right? It's not learning the lesson that it's not the desire for sense of um, wishing ourselves well. That's not a problem. The problem is how we go about it. Right? So we go about it by denying its presence here and looking for it elsewhere, and then we go down that road, right? So, but it's not the actual desire for our own well-being that's the issue at all. And it's actually not even a problem to experience pleasure, right? Pleasure comes our way. There's no spiritual payoff for denying that it's pleasurable. If it feels good, um, yeah, just enjoy it, right? So it's not the pleasure itself that's the problem. The solution isn't to deny ourselves pleasure or to avoid all pain, right? To sort of numb ourselves out, sort of confine our um, our desires into such a small package that we're never too perturbed. And I know a lot of spiritual practices suggest that, but to my ears, that sounds a lot like um, Nancy Reagan's war on drug slogan, just say no, right? Right? Just don't desire anything, that'll solve it. But I mean, is that really the solution? Does that really feel like it resolves this movement within us to, um, towards our own well-being? Is that the energy that we really want to deny? Or is that the energy we should be using? So my suggestion is that that energy of desiring our own sense of well-being, um, isn't the problem. The problem is that we don't do it wisely, right? We sell ourselves short. We trade Manhattan for trinkets, right? We're out looking for food in a dumpster, and there's a feast like just behind us. So this is the basis for the often used symbol of the beggar, in a shaggy coat with a, priceless diamond in the pocket that the beggar never bothered to notice. And so we go around sort of looking for um, the next pleasure, something to get us by, um, a little relief, you know, maybe, you know, whole box of cookies or something, just whatever sort of is going to get us by the next moment of, rather than having to face this sense of inner emptiness, really. And so we're willing to pursue and spend a great deal of effort doing it, pursuing um, pleasures to keep us from having to um, settle into this internal sense of awareness, really. Just that um, empty, alive, but empty quality of just being without the need for any particular set of conditions, right? So when we sense into this awareness, maybe for the first time, um, we recognize that it doesn't need anything, doesn't need anything to feel complete. So there's a sense of self-fulfillment. That fulfillment doesn't mean in this context, it doesn't mean um, full of ideas and um, philosophical structures and opinions and accumulated experiences and good feelings. Doesn't mean any of that. It just means the um, absence of a sense of lack, right? It feels complete. It feels full. It doesn't feel complete as in terminal. It feels complete as in not needing anything additional. Doesn't need any specific conditions in order to feel um, perfectly fine. So the upside of that is that um, our sense of well-being isn't subjected to the whims or actions of other people because we're not dependent on that. We're not dependent on their, bestowing, praise or respect or some gift towards us. Um, it's also not subject to coming and going, right? Since it's empty of content, um, there's nothing to be gained and there's nothing to be lost, right? It's just available. It's available to be filled with whatever experience may come our way, and yet not tarnished by any of it, not subject to harm in that way. Right. So if we're holding on to this idea of happiness lying outside of ourselves, we suffer because we aren't always able to get what we want. We suffer because it doesn't last when we do get it, and we suffer because it's never ultimately satisfying, and we can feel that fading away. Um, so that might not always feel like a sharp pain. It can just feel like a sort of a dull ache of um, life passing us by without the joy that we had hoped for when we were, right? But if we're looking to the outside for satisfaction of that um, and denying its presence here, we will always come up short. We will always be left wanting more, better, bigger, you know, whether it's in the material world, whether it's in the spiritual journey. When we're looking for satisfaction as in the content of our awareness, we will always um, be disappointed ultimately. Might be nice, might be really nice, but ultimately it won't be enough. It is only when we come back to being willing to rest in our own innate, already present awareness, that is immense enough to receive everything, every experience, every feeling, every thought, every idea, every opinion, but not requiring any of it. So that whole sense of wanting disappears. And that's what actually ultimately satisfies this yearning for our own um, wellness. It's the recognition of what we actually are that allows that yearning to come to rest. Right? It comes to rest in the the fulfillment of that yearning, right? And that fulfillment isn't subject to decay. It's not subject to impermanence because, um, unlike everything else, that awareness isn't a thing. It's not. It's not in the same dimension. So it's not subject to the decay of time. It's not subject to our wanting more, self-sufficient in that way. So when we say that there, lies the fulfillment, the resolution of this desiring, this very natural desiring for our own wellness in a healthy way, as this um, innate awareness. And there's a contentedness there. It's not based on any particular conditions. Happiness can still, pleasant experiences can still arise. We get to enjoy those. There's no spiritual benefit from denying ourselves that. And painful experiences happen too. And we know that all of those experiences are impermanent, and that's part of the beauty of them. It's just like the beauty of a flower. Part of its beauty is its impermanence. It's not like a plastic flower. Things arise and for a short time, and we get to enjoy that. But we can assume that if we are just content with a sense of fulfillment of being this awareness, um, it can. I mean, it's the basis for um, Jesus' statement, peace beyond all understanding, right? It's it's a peacefulness, it's a contentedness that isn't dependent on circumstances. Um, so from a conventional human standpoint, we don't understand that, right? We don't, how can you be content if there's nothing to be content about? How can you be okay with that, without the stimulation? So it's, when I said before that, our seeking isn't wrong, it's just not done wisely, right? So this movement towards our own sense of wellness or happiness, um, it's not to suppress that desire, but to actually use that desire, actually inflate that desire um, to the point where it can become quite consuming, right? I just have to know what this life is about. But so rather than trying to tamp down the sense of desire and make ourselves a bit numb um, by, expanding that desire to something really worthy of it, namely our own recognition of what this life is about. That desire sort of overshadows, a little tiny desire of going out hunting down um, pleasures. Um, so it's sort of like, if you have a flashlight at night and you're looking around, once the sun comes out, you don't need the flashlight anymore. Sort of just overwhelmed by the sun. So rather than denying the flashlight, we can just refocus our desiring on knowing the sun. We just expand our horizons. Um, but if we recognize where that leads to the recognition of what we are, is this spacious awareness, primordial awareness, you could say. Um, and there's a contentedness there. We can say, yeah, but what would get us up off the couch, right? What would motivate us to do anything? If there was just an innate contentedness, is that really an attractive thing to strive for? And the truth is that for a while, you may not feel like getting up off the couch. It may be such a relief to be unburdened from seeking that you're just happy to just be for a while, and any movement to go out and try to do anything can almost be a bit painful or a bit silly, or um, and it can feel like that for a while. It's a little bit odd, but that's how it is for seems like quite a few people. But eventually, something begins to move. It's almost like it was still all winter, and then in the spring, one day, there's a little bit of fresh breeze. And then there's some movement. And it may be a movement in a direction that you had no idea that you were even remotely interested in, right? You might find yourself doing something that surprises you, and yet there you are doing it. And it can be literally anything. Um, it could be, something involving social justice, or ecology, or our painted food system, or taking care of a young child or an aging parent, or um, gardening, or you know raising plants to feed the butterfly. It could be anything, anything. You don't know how that movement may begin to move. Um, you know, might even be foolish enough to find yourself talking about enlightenment or something. Who knows? But this movement happens, but it happens from a different place than um, where we used to move from. It happens more from a place of what does this situation require? For the highest and best good of all involved. Do I have a role in it? What role is that? And be willing to play that part, whatever that happens to be, whatever situation you might find yourself in. Um, where we used to come from, most of us, was um, any situation is like, what's the best outcome for me? So this is quite a different movement. And if we find ourselves after the recognition of what we actually are, um, there comes, maybe not immediately, but there comes an understanding that uh, what we each are already um, is also undifferentiated from everyone else. It's the same awareness that's functioning through this body mind here, through your body mind there for all of us already, fully, fully functioning. As it gets filtered through our conditioning, it's going to look different for all of us. But the underlying consciousness is the same. Wang Po sort of poetically says that to gaze upon a single drop of water um, and to recognize its wetness is to um, recognize all the water in the universe. Right? So if we see it, if we can see it here, we can see it everywhere. You know, like I say, maybe not immediately, but when we really sense into what this awareness is, we can see that it's not um, being generated by this separate self. It's not this awareness compared to that awareness. It's awareness, right? Still, it's still what we are. It's not a foreign object. It's not some alien force. It's what we essentially are. Couldn't be otherwise. We realize that that same amazing capacity to be aware is, I mean, we can look around and see other people are aware too. Same. And once we see that, our interactions with other people are different because, you know, even just the idea of doing something to someone else's disadvantage, if there's a recognition that um, underneath appearances, there is this oneness, you know, this life force manifesting here and there. You know, why would we identify as a separate self when we know that deep down there is no separation? Why would we treat another person? Why would we attempt to fix another person? Why would we judge another person? So it doesn't in any way inhibit what we do, but it changes the perspective from which we do it. So, and if we get off base, you know, if we're interacting with somebody else and you know, we sort of fall back into personal separate selfness and find ourselves interacting from that place, we can feel it. You know, what we may have ignored in past times, when we're really sensitive to that, that that doesn't feel good. It's not that we'll get it perfect every time, right? But if we're off base, the body has um, and is very um, quick and sometimes very forceful in informing us that we've um, gotten off base and it's time to look. It's time to look. You know, there's any number of teachers, Jean Klein, Byron Katie, that all say that suffering is a pointer. Suffering is always a pointer. Anytime we suffer, it's time to look. So this, in this case, the body is very good about that to say, oh, time to look at what you were believing in that moment that caused a disconnect with the other person. So as we begin moving from this different place, um, Adia had this really nice um, phrase about this point, and he said that we are far happier to be in service to what we love than we are if we're just trying to get more of what we love. So, we can begin pondering the question, of what, you know, in what am I in service to? We don't have to be awakened to ask that question, you know, or what are we in service to? What are we, devoting our time and energy towards? And it's a real good indication of what we actually care about compared to what we might say we care about. So this movement where we recognize our essence as uh, spacious awareness, it's not a stoic thing, right? It's not like I'm just not going to be um, attracted to pleasure. I'm just going to pretend that I'll just suffer through pain, um, without flinching. It's not that. It's really not denial of any experience, but the relationship to the experience changes. When we realize that we are um, this consciousness beyond um, harm in circumstances. I mean, it sounds like a grand statement, but it's easily verifiable, right? We can see that that awareness that is present in this moment was present 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we may have endured all kinds of hardships, but that awareness is as aware today as ever. Maybe our memory's not quite as good. Um, Maybe our opinions have changed, etc. But the awareness of being present in this moment, whether we recognize it or not, is still fully functional, just like it always has been. So we can, um, rather than devoting all this energy to pursuing certain conditions, we can allow life to just um, unfold as it will, and we get to be both the observer and a participant. Right? We get to do both. It um, doesn't limit us from doing anything. It actually frees us to do things that we didn't think that we could do. Um, we didn't think that we could do them because of our own sense of self-doubt or self-limitations or uncertainties. We find out that, um, yeah, we're more willing, we're more willing to um, do things, do new things, knowing that what we fundamentally are is not subject to harm. That's the key. Beyond fear, right? Beyond fear. When we move from that place, it may look similar to what we may have done in the past. There's no need to give up skills that we have or things that we enjoy, but we're not coming from out of a sense of lack or a hope for gain, right? It's coming out of an expression, a movement from fullness, from joy, from love. It's not coming from lack or hope for gain. Quite different, quite different. Okay, let's see if anyone has any questions or anything they'd like to talk about.